this is my motto. It is about the nationalism on social media following COVID. Firstly, I will give you the model overview. So, as you can see, this model describes why there has been an increase in nationalism on social media in the wake of the COVID. I think this area of investigation is important because it focuses on the growing trend of the conflict between different countries and regions around the world in pandemic. You can see that governments around the world are blaming the sources of the virus and they compare their efforts to control the COVID. So I think in this background, the role of the social media is worth attention because it allows the public to express their feelings and make their voices heard. So I want to explore how social media and COVID are working together to fuel a growing nationalism. On the one hand, this model helps us to explore how social media affects the communication and collection of our human society, and also on the other hand, it helps us to reflect on how to use social media and some digitalization to avoid some possible risks in our public health emergencies. As for the target audience, this model is actually for those users on the social media. This is because the nationalism has become a tool for those governments and also the capital with the great power to seek their benefits in pandemic. However, our are at the disadvantage, so it's easier for them to fall into an information bias because they can only receive the information that those in power want them to receive. So we can see from the ratings before that some types of the AI system will exploit the human weaknesses and the profit for their owners will be at the cost of the non-adopters of such technology. We can think about China as an example. It's clear to see that many users with no media literacy are easily exploited in pandemic on the social media, and they will make some hostile words and practices online. So this model is to alert the users to the risks of being manipulated by the capitals or the government, and it will help them to increase their awareness of some ultra nationalism online. And also, this model will show them why the nationalism is emerging as a result of the combination of social media and the COVID. The subpart is about some variables in the model. Firstly, you can see that there are three main topics of the model: social media, nationalism, and COVID. And those red labels are some very significant variables in my model. They just demonstrate how these three main topics are connected with each other. Firstly, I want to talk about some variables around the social media. You can see that these three variables are some significant functions and characteristics of social media. I want to emphasize the AI of social media because we have read about the highly opaque characteristic of it. So maybe it can give us some accurate prediction, but it's difficult to interpret why this lead to some certain decisions. So due to the lack of the transparency, AI some models are usually used as some black boxes. And this will lead to some effect such as some information cocoon and some biased personalized recommendation and the filter bubbles. And these effects will just lead to some information bias, just as Hancock have talked about the AI mediated communication systems are trained on existing human communication. So the biases in training data will likely to be replicated and amplified by AI. Also, the knowledge monopoly is important. Just as English has presented, it demonstrates how the ruling classes maintain their political powers through the control of the key communications technologies. And also, Sustain has talked about the reason why Google is so successfully at identifying what the specific researchers want is that it just know what the majority of the researchers want. So The government and the company can also have the knowledge monopoly on social media and some other digital platforms. And secondly, we can talk about some variables around the nationalism. Imagined community is a very important variable. Anderson has a talk about nation is an imagined community, one that is born both inherently limited and sovereign. We can think about the nations, religions, and some other groups are so large, so the members can never meet with each other in their real life. However, the communicative exchanges of the group members can create a parasocial sense of the belonging. Especially the printing press and its role in this nationalism demonstrate the relationship between nationalism and communication. Anderson talked about the development of printing press made the mass media and education available. So this provides an important function for the spread of the nation concept. In most modern countries, nationalism is nurtured through the mass media and some state controlled educational institutions. The disaster nationalism, trauma, and memory politics is a variable to collect the nationalism and COVID. So the concept of the disaster nationalism just emphasized the role of the collective experience and accounts of the disaster in recreating the dominant understanding of national identity and some political orders. So, in some disasters, the constant flagging of the national community will create the symbolic backdrop, and the users will feel empowered to take some actions. And the users will just interpret this kind of actions as some patriotic. The one-dimensional source is to link the nationalism and social media, because you can see that governments, politics, makers, and some purveyors of the mass information will to have some propaganda and discourse and to emphasize their self-validating. So on the social media, there will be the trend of the one-dimensional sort, and especially under the COVID, this kind of one-dimensional thought will be enhanced to propose some of the nationalism ideas. And these three variables, especially the authority, is to link COVID and nationalism. Piper has talked about the studies, expert declarations, and some official pronouncements have an authoritative effect on social media. This makes the viewers more likely to be incited and persuaded. So, some authoritative actors will rely on their propaganda efforts to generate some viral content on the social media. This will resonate through the dedicated channels. And there are many readings talking about authority on social media. Deborah talked about attention-grabbing algorithms underlying social media also propel some authoritarian practices that aim to sow confusion, ignorance, prejudice, and chaos. So this kind of authoritarian practices will facilitate some manipulation and also undermine accountability on the social media. And this kind of variable just demonstrate the relation between COVID and social media. As you can see from those variables, my motto is to present the relationship between social media, nationalism, and COVID. So I think this model can help us to better understand that ideally in pandemic, everyone can exchange ideas and information about the pandemic on social media. However, the algorithm bias, knowledge monopoly, information bias, and control brought by the authoritarianism on social media will make the public opinion more and more one-dimensional, and this will intensify the nationalism, especially some ultra-nationalism in this disaster. We can think about some possible implications of this model. I think it helps us to understand some decisions under the pandemic and also help us to extend the relevant research about some relationship between social media, nationalism, and the COVID. For example, we can think about why has the binary opposition between China and the West in the global imagination intensified after the outbreak of this pandemic. The Chinese official media have tried to invent the long-standing nationalism by control the digital channels such as the social media for their propaganda and the centralized control. And this approach turns a disaster of COVID into a source of the strengthening nationalism then, and this process will heighten the people's awareness of the imagined community, and possibly this will lead to the ultra nationalism. In this process, the thoughts on the social media are more and more one dimensional, and when the one dimensional thoughts happens more and more on the social media, then the new cycle will just get started. The last part is about some important research questions we can think about under this model. The first one is, have social media and other digital technologies changed the characters of the contemporary nationalism? John once stated that while digital technologies were initially seen as the harbingers of globalization, the scholars are increasingly acknowledging their role in the rise of the nationalism and the right wing populism. So, we can reflect on will the diverse and fragmented information content of social media will lead to some corresponding trend of the nationalism, and how will this change these world situations and how to avoid some potential risks? And we can explore what is the communication role of social media in public health emergencies. Popularizing science and knowledge related to the pandemic on social media has promoted the widespread use of the scientific content, and also it enhances the public's awareness and ability to deal with the COVID. However, such kind of information can reinforce the authoritarianism and also the ultranationalism. The users are more and more easily exploited by the governments and also the capitals in this disaster. So, we can reflect on how to maximize the social media's role in public health emergencies. And this is my motto. Thanks for your listening and look forward to all of your comments.